So today, we're diving into the crisis unfolding in Iran, a situation that has the whole world watching. You've got this perfect storm brewing, a massive popular uprising, a brutal crackdown from the state, and a really tense international standoff, all happening at once. Let's break down how these three forces are colliding. Everything kicked off with something really dramatic. On January 8th, the entire country of Iran just went dark. We're talking a complete nationwide internet blackout. And no, this wasn't some technical glitch. This was a deliberate move. Right away, internet watchdogs like NetBlocks flagged it. This is a classic move for the Iranian government when there's unrest. So you have to ask, what was happening on the ground that the regime was so desperate to hide from the rest of the world? To answer that, you have to look away from the screens and onto the streets, because a powerful, coordinated popular movement was hitting a boiling point all across the country. The sheer scale of this was just remarkable. We're not talking about a small, isolated protest. This was a general strike and demonstrations in every single one of Iran's 31 provinces at the same time. People also showed their defiance in really symbolic ways, like tearing down a statue of the powerful regime figure, Qasem Soleimani, or just flooding the streets with cars, honking their horns in solidarity. That level of coordination is incredibly rare, and it tells you something big is happening. So what drives so many people into the streets, risking their lives against a regime that is notoriously repressive? Well, the answer really comes down to daily survival. At its core, these protests are fueled by just deep economic despair. Public anger has completely boiled over because of soaring inflation and the total collapse of their currency, the rial. For the average person, that means their savings are basically vanishing into thin air, and they can't afford basic things they need to live. So as these protests got more and more intense, the state didn't respond with reforms or dialogue. It responded with force. 45. According to human rights groups on the ground, that's the number of people who have been killed by Iranian forces since these protests really kicked off in December. 45 people. And this number, 13, that's the death toll from just one day. January 7th is now being called the bloodiest day of the movement so far. It just shows you how brutally and how quickly the state's response escalated. And the crackdown goes way beyond the streets. We already talked about the internet blackout. That's to stop people from communicating and to hide the violence. But activists are also reporting this absolutely chilling new tactic. Security forces are apparently raiding hospitals to find and detain wounded protesters. They're turning places of healing into traps. But here is the massive contradiction at the heart of the regime's public message. On January 8th, the same day as the internet blackout, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian actually called for restraint. He urged officials to avoid violence. It was a public call for peace, even as a violent crackdown was in full swing. Now, this crisis isn't just happening inside Iran's borders. As the world started to see what was going on, the war of words between Tehran and Washington, D.C. began to escalate, and fast. It really became this rhetorical standoff. On one side, you had the United States issuing these very direct threats of military action. And on the other, Iran was firing back with its own stark warnings, promising a forceful response and even suggesting it might be the one to strike first. And the threat from the U.S. was incredibly blunt. In an interview, then President Trump didn't mince words at all. He basically said U.S. military action was on the table, and it was directly tied to how the regime treated the protesters. And this came right after earlier statements that the U.S. was locked and loaded. Iran's response was just as sharp. Just 2 days earlier, its defense council released a statement with some very, very specific language: preemptive strikes. That's a big deal. It signals a shift to a much more aggressive defensive posture, basically saying they won't wait to be attacked first. So all of this, the uprising, the crackdown, the international warnings, brings us to the critical question: what happens next? You've got this immense pressure building from the inside and from the outside, and it's pushing Iran to a major crossroads. So let's just recap. You've got these three powerful forces on a collision course. You have the protesters in the streets, driven there by economic desperation. You have the Iranian government trying to crush dissent with one hand while managing its public image with the other. And then you have the United States, watching from the outside, threatening to get involved. And that leaves us with the final, really pressing question. The Iranian regime is caught in a vice, right? It's being squeezed on two fronts, by a population at home that has reached its absolute breaking point, and by a superpower abroad that's threatening war. The path Iran chooses next, well, that's going to have consequences not just for its own people, but for the entire world.